All right, welcome to another episode of New Wine Uncorked. And as always, I'm stoked to join Phil and Tony for yet another riveting discussion and dialogue about the church, about life, about cultural engagement. Last week, we talked about the church, civil unrest, and is the church at rest, or is the church stepping in and engaging? And this week, we want to continue with that theme. We just, if you haven't been paying attention, a couple days ago, the country celebrated the inauguration of its 46th president. And so for some, 78, 80 million people, this was a victory and a celebration. For 74 to 75 million, this was devastating, and some, every 4 years, we sometimes have this cycle, but the church is the church. And just like Jesus Christ, the church is the same yesterday, today, and forever, because the church follows in the footsteps of Christ. But it doesn't feel like that at all, during this whole thing. And so we've been discussing this. And so today, this idea of hope, the truth of hope, is it an inaugurated hope, or is it hope deferred? And does the country have something to look forward to because the church is engaging, or is it going to be just yet another year, just like everything else, and so we want to continue this dialogue. So I'm not sure where you guys stand with it. Tony, you were able to participate with us. Was that yesterday or a couple days ago with the Facebook live special inauguration of the Table Talks, and we got a chance to talk about that. And a lot of people are talking about this, and I hear it from both sides as to whether this was, the election of the elections, right? And I don't know what you guys have heard within your church context and everything, but it's quite interesting to me. And my questions are, what does the church do? At one time, it was a big deal that, President Biden was a practicing Catholic. Will his church, will the religion continue to play into it during the debates? I don't know if you guys remember when Pete Buttigieg kept talking about his faith. Democrats have faith. So I'm wondering, do you see religion as being as much a part of this presidency as it was with Trump, because Trump was partnered with the religious right? Do you think that hope is going to be actually enacted through this presidency as, this unifying theme continues to come about? Or could it be devastating in the sense that these hopes become deferred because it's just nothing more than talk and rhetoric? I'm not sure. Where do you guys stand on, where do you see where we're at,
I was going to say, go first, Tony, if you want to.
Christian humility. We don't have to have Christian humility on this show, okay?
I just wanted to follow the pattern of Phil dropping wisdom and then me making things messy. Hope deferred. I think from my vantage point, where I'm at is, I think with the transition of power to President Biden, for me, it wasn't necessarily hope inaugurated, but for me, hope has always been incarnational, because just as truth is relative to who Jesus is, hope can only ever be found in Jesus. And so I as relieved as I am that it was to the extent that was possible, it was a peaceful transition. I'm like I shared on our table talk, I'm not too hopeful or disappointed either way. I think I want to have a realist predisposition to where our country is at. In regards to our churches, I would say I feel a sense of lament, because we still have, I hope to call them brothers and sisters, we have a sector of Christians in the United States who still are claiming prophecies of military takeover, of Trump being reelected for a second term. And so it seems that our faith, to some extent, is holding as a sector of Christians captive in a particular reality. And so as a follower of Jesus, I'm now hopeful because it is now President Biden over President Trump. I am hopeful because, like you said, Matt, Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. But I think that hope has a space for lament, in seeing how there's still Christians who hold to a different form of reality. And I don't know if from a anthropological or sociological perspective, I don't know if I can call them brothers and sisters. I don't know if they would call me a brother in Christ. And so this contending version of reality leads to a contending version of Christianity. So I sit in this liminal space.
Yeah, definitely. I don't necessarily see our hope kind of wrapped in the election. I know just what you mentioned, Tony. There's this separation within the church right now, where there's a lot of people that saw hope in Trump that was there, and same time there's a lot of believers who saw hope in forthcoming Biden. They were relieved that Biden was able to win that election. And I think just in relation to it, that there's a couple of things that are even more so impacting us, because we're in the middle of COVID. The church is going to drastically change and has changed over these past year. So we could have more of the separation where people kind of stick to their own kind of thing, and then you'll play continual games. So I'm wondering if we're going to get back to normal in that sense, where we'll get together and not talk about politics ever again. But I do think that we're kind of not there right now. I don't think we'll ever be there, where we will be talking about these things. We will be talking about political affiliation in some regard, political issues in some regard, and then we have to be honest about how we feel and who we see. And I understood that Biden was one of the more stronger Democratic candidates when we were going through that process. But at the same token, there are a lot of shortcomings. There are a lot of issues that need to be cleared up. And there's going to be a lot of calling to the carpet that needs to happen over the next little bit, just politically. And at the same token, in some regard, a return to Biden is a return to the norm in political sense, because it's an exit from Trump. And what was happening before Biden was a lot of people were not happy with the way Washington was handling things anyway. This is part of why we had Barack Obama elected. He was coming in with a whole new attitude about what Washington was going to be. And then we had Trump with the same kind of thing, where we're throwing an anarchist in the middle of everything. So politically, there's still a lot of questions to be answered, because if Biden's a return to the norm, we're still all unhappy. So now we're going to still want an anarchist. We're still going to want someone that's going to ruffle feathers. And I don't know if we're going to see that out of Biden. And within the church, I don't know if we want another Trump. People may want another Trump, but there's still some things that needs to be pushed, that the church is going to have to push. And so Biden's going to have to step up and have to respond to it, because we are a force in this. So we're going to have to step into it and actually be a force to be able to push him in the ways and the things that we find good to our perspective.
Yeah, I'm wondering if, do you think because of what happened, I mean, I don't ever want to compare Trump with Obama, but socially, do you think it was somewhat of a similar situation in where it was disruptive? Because Obama's an election into the presidency, I gotta believe, and I mean, 2008, we were actually over in Scotland, and so I don't remember a lot of. I remember the UK erupting. It was like a big deal that Obama was elected. But I'm wondering, if we thought back, was it as disruptive though for the the nation as it felt like with Trump? Because it was a big deal in the sense of historic. Because like you were saying, Phil, people were dismayed, and so they needed change, and that's what they felt like they maybe thought they were getting with Trump. I don't know, until because they are no way near characteristic the same, between Obama and Trump, and yet it still felt that disruption. So I'm wondering, what will be the response though? Yes, Biden's coming in, a return back to normalcy, but taking up your point, when Obama was elected, people didn't want normalcy, right? They wanted a disruption. And then it felt like they weren't quite had enough disruption, and so maybe there was a need for more disruption. They just didn't realize what disruption they were getting from Trump. And so I'm wondering, does this though continue to spark some interest within not just the politics, but people of faith that say, hey, this does matter? Like, you saw how the right, the religious right could co-opt or commandeer a party. Does that stop though? Like, do the Democrats who profess faith, do they get just as aggressive with their faith and say, hey, this needs to happen? Or does that sort of fade because everyone just leaves religion with Republicans, and when Democrats are in control, it's more social, and then we forget that social justice can only happen through the church? I don't know.
Well, a couple of things. Remember Obama came a response to George W. Bush.
Mm.
And if we talk about Christianity, religious right co-opting a political party, we were seeing it then. If we didn't see it before, we definitely saw it during the 2 terms that Bush was in office. I mean, one of my friends who was a pastor at a church at a time, he was very, very interested in this. We were all just coming adults at the time. I was 20 some odd years old at the time, right? And so we're just able to vote, and within our church, there was a lot of Measure 36. That was the constitutional amendment that happened in Oregon to change our constitution to define marriage. There was a lot of conversation about George W. Bush, him as president, and the like. And so our church was all right in the middle of that conversation. And then a couple of years later, Trayvon Martin happened, and our church stayed out of everything. And we're like, wait, we thought this is what our church did. And our church, the church we were part of at the time, had a long history of political activism. So it wasn't outside of the fray to be involved in that conversation. But the energy that was behind the Bush years versus the energy that was behind Trayvon Martin was so different that saying all that, I believe that it's very easy for the church to jump into any side of anything. So for me, Barack Obama, it was a pleasant surprise. It was great to see Black man running for president, win presidency. A lot of emotions in my household at the time. But I imagine there was a lot of other people in America that was not feeling the same energy, that coming out of Bush, they were like, whoa, we wanted this and we didn't get something similar. So I know that was there. It just wasn't in my household.
Mm.
For me, I wonder if it almost, in my heart and my spirit, it feels like there's been this internal shift where for the last 4 years, it's been a constructive or destructive critique of the religious right and the effects of the marriage between politics and evangelical Christianity. And now with a switch to Biden, I don't think there needs to be a, I frankly don't see Democratic or liberal voices trying to marry Christianity with a Democrat politic. And so my critique of the Democratic Party and of Biden and Harris's presidency is going to be vastly different than my critique of Trump and evangelicalism. And so I hope our viewers hear clearly that I'm still committed to holding powers that be accountable. I just don't see the same marriage between the current political party that's in power and the Christian faith. And so if we're talking about where I'm hopeful then in regards to the church and to this current political party, I think I'm hopeful that we have the space to be proactive and to be forward thinking. We're no longer trying to untangle faith and politics, but I think we have a creative space to currently think about what does it mean to have my faith be lived out in politics? Because within the religious right, there's a particular framework that's already imposed. And so for me, I'm not trying to resist that temptation anymore. Now I feel free to fully live into my faith without the power dynamics, without the cumbersome rhetoric of, is this a conservative rhetoric or is this a theological rhetoric? Some will say it's the same. I think what we see right now, and if we're going to learn anything from the religious right, is that there's for better or for worse, a consistency of living out their faith in politics. And we see that embodied through the prophetic gifting of Trump's going to be reelected still. There's going to be a military takeover. So there's a consistency in that embodied political faith. And so as somebody who does not identify with the religious right and who does not see the Democrats as living out a particular political faith or a faithful politic, the hope is that the church moves forward in discerning its own particular politic.
But don't you think though that this is where I want to push though, because while we say there's not a marrying of the religion in the politics in the left as much, one of the first speeches after Biden was president that Pelosi gave was the desecration, or maybe it was not before the inauguration, but the desecration of the temple. That is clearly religious speech. And so do we give her a pass though, because they don't try to marry right in front of us as abruptly and as aggressively and abrasively the religion with the politics, all the while saying no separation of church and state? Does she get a pass, or do we have to push back on her and say, whoa, listen, Speaker, you're using weighted language there now. So what are you going to do about the unborn, the sanctity of life? Because I'm with you, Speaker, on pushing for the sanctity of life for immigration and immigrants. But what about you in your religious talk about the desecration? What about my temple as the body? Are we going to talk about, is it desecration of the temple when you take away a life in the body? So do we give them a pass, or how do we, so that the hope doesn't get deferred? Because I'm all about social justice. I think we all are, but social justice apart from the one who created the gospel socially leaves, many people disenfranchised. And so that's where I wonder, I hear what you're saying, Tony, but sometimes I wonder though, because we've so married religious right, we call it religious right. We don't even call it religious left, right? And so what is so right about religion being with one side and us being okay with that and not pushing the other side and saying, hey, the faith is all the same?
Yeah. With Pelosi, I would say in its particular configuration, I wouldn't say it's a religious left or a liberal faith. I would say it's American imperialism. And so I think religious right falls under that category. And whatever the Democrats are guilty of or need to be judged for, it's not the same as the right, but it all falls under the imperialistic tendency of America, the exceptionalism of America, the idea that God has given us this land. Jen Hatmaker issued a apology for her prayer at the faith leader gathering, because she prayed that God gave this land to America as its inheritance, as its heritage. And then she retracted that and said, no, it was stolen land from Native Americans. And so, yes, I would agree with you. We need to critique the ways that the Democrats have co-opted and appropriated Christian language. I would say it's just different. I don't believe in a religious left. I think it's under American imperialism, which the religious right would fall under.
Yeah, in addition to that, I'm thinking of not just Nancy Pelosi. There were a lot of people from left and right in light of the coup attempt that we had on January 6th, that was using that language, because I don't know if we have another way to call things sacred. They were saying that the state house is sacred. And so we have our religious language that we will lend to those things. I've heard it called a cathedral. I heard it called a temple, all those kind of things, because we want to call it sacred. And I don't think we have better language to do it. Getting back to what you mentioned a moment ago, Tony, I want to see if I'm articulating what you laid out correctly, where you would say, would you agree with the notion that for the religious right, it's almost like the faith kind of pushes or powers the politics, but on the left, it kind of goes the other way around, that as a believer, as a Christian that happens to be a Democrat, I happen to stumble into values that the left actually has. So I'm stumbling kind of into those values and I kind of live in that world, but it's not necessarily that my faith is pushing me towards that politic, but I happen to be living in that vein. And so I end up kind of stumbling into some of those ideals. Is that kind of a fair way to describe what you just explained?
I think optimistically people on the left would want to say that. That's, oh, my faith so happens to align with the policies of the left. But I think both left and right are guilty of letting their politics drive their faith rather than their faith drive their politic. It's just a different expression. I think the right may be more explicit about how, so the right would, conservative Republicans and the like would claim that their faith influences their politics. And I think same on the left. But I would say both are guilty of allowing their politics to inform their faith and how they live out their faith. I want to be consistent on that critique.
Absolutely. And oh man, I had another question there and I can't remember it. So I'm going to move. So I'm letting Matt move on to the next issue. Go ahead, bro.
Well, no, because I think it's fascinating with the religious aspect of it, because we have allowed it to be co-opted at certain times by one group or another. And yet they both, because my household was talking about this yesterday about this value posturing, and when religion comes in, it tends to be not talk about what we would think religion, but more about morals and about this social construct of what it means to be an appropriate citizen. In fact, I was talking to someone who has participated with us on Table Talks about Yang's whole paying people for their data and things like this. And while it sounds good and it sounds very democratic and very social justice-y, it just seems like the other side, though, of being co-opted into what it means to be a citizen for this polis. Because if they start paying us for our data, don't they then draw us into, when you get paid, you become part of their machine? And so again, the social justice aspect and push into justice for society is absolutely a hopeful truth. But where does religion come into, so that it is not just rhetoric of language, rhetoric of religion, but an actual incarnation is exactly what you talked about in the beginning with this incarnational aspect in that relativity of Jesus. Like, I want to continue to press into that, is to anyone who wants to use religious language, fine. But is there then folks who live out religious language who are going to stand up and say, hey, that's cool? Do we understand, though, because I don't know if you guys saw this on Twitter, Claiborne was going back and forth between trying to pit Reverend Billy Graham against, son Franklin Graham, and saying, because Franklin talked about the Peace Prize for Trump and very pro-Trump. And the quote that that Shane used from Billy Graham was that no party should try to marry faith in politics, and it was a critique of the religious right. And so, and this is my concern, is that for people to show that the Democrats are hope, what they do is they demonize the other side by showing then, oh, it's a dualistic. It's either you're with Billy Graham and no marriage of faith in politics, or you're with Franklin Graham and Trump is your savior. And I'm like, but that doesn't allow for anything, because then faith is still a part of Democrats. Like Shane Claiborne, I'm like, well, okay, so you're not making like Trump your idol, but are you not making then the conflict the idol, where you're pitting, like, the other side is no evil or darkened than my side, whatever my side is, right? And this whole side thing just bugs me. And that's where the political thing, it's always a us or them. We have it a red or blue. And how does religion, from the pure Christians that are from the blue side and the pure Christians from the red side, how do they come to, can they, like, does a Biden presidency allow that more so, because he's talking about unifying, and Harris is unifying. We have I just don't want it to be a check mark where the church says, hey, look how progressive we are. We allowed this nation to elect a unifier and a female and a biracial, a woman. And so we're good socially and everything. We're back to normal now. So it's all good to go. That's my concern with the church is, hey, look, well, we allowed this to happen. We're progressive, how does that not happen?
Well, I think that happened 4 years ago. I think that we came out of Obama and said, "Yo, we elected a black dude for president 2 terms. Racism is done. We don't have this issue anymore. It's handled," and found out very quickly that it is far worse than we thought it was. But I think because we have this borrowing of language that we use, and how as we mentioned a while ago, that our politics very often does push our faith, that we are very susceptible to people stealing our language, and then we're thinking they're stealing our values. And so in that regard, as a believer, you have to really stand firm on what you are as a believer. Are you into the politics of Jesus? Are you into, and I'm not saying politics of Jesus as in taking left or right in that regard, but politics as found in the text of the scriptures. Are we into living out Jesus's life? If we're about that, then we're going to always run against, we're going to consistently be a critic to the left and the right regularly. And we're not going to find our home in any of those places, because this is not our home. We're not playing these games. So that's going to be a thing. But if we look for someone to borrow our language, to talk the way we talk, we're going to get confused and think that they're taking our values when they're really not. And I think over the past 4 years, we saw that. And I think if we look very close, the prior 8 years, we saw the same thing. And if we look back, the 8 years before that, we saw the same thing, that they used our language. They weren't using all of our values. So,
Yeah. I think wealth makes sinners of all saints. I think with what we're seeing, and this is why intersectionality is so important, because there's this artificial separation or divide between Democrats and Republicans, but the unifier is wealth disparity, it's income disparity. And so Nancy Pelosi can afford, literally, monetarily, and the like, she can afford to play the atheist or agnostic game when it benefits her, and then it's helpful to play the religious or Christian game when it benefits her. Not to take away from my brothers and sisters who celebrated Harris's appointment as the vice president, but I have some very sharp criticisms of Harris. Yes, she is our first female vice president. She is interracial, so she represents the Indian community as well as the Black community. But Harris's record as the Attorney General in California is deeply concerning and unsettling for someone who supposedly champions the equitable treatment of the Black community. Her record as the Attorney General is inconsistent with her rhetoric of being a defender of justice for the Black community. And so when we talk about, sure, she is a Democrat, what unites us common people is that she is much more wealthy than all of us. So regardless of where we are in our political affiliation, our economic affiliation unifies all of us, because wealth makes a sinner out of all saints. And so great for representation. And I believe that Harris points to younger females, the capacity and potential that they inherently have. But I don't want to virtue signal. I don't want to say, look, we have Harris and now everything is okay. If anything, it is more insidious if I don't hold her to account and critique Harris, because her record is abysmal as Attorney General, as someone who wants to fight for equitable treatment of Black communities and communities of color. I'm very concerned the legislative work that Harris and Biden will do. I don't believe that Black brothers and sisters will get a fair shot under Harris. I think there's so much more that needs to be done. And so that's why I don't believe in a religious left. And I think this all falls under American imperialism. And that's why intersectionality is so important, because people on whatever side of the spectrum, we are united because of our tax bracket. And that we need to talk about.
The money thing is, dude, I'm telling you, I got I don't know, ran into some, issues even at the school that I was teaching at, because of when you critique patriotism in pennies, their finances, of Americans. And those are the two things. I mean, we talk about, you could talk about politics, but once it comes into, are you loyal as a patriot, all of a sudden, and I wonder though, if a number of people would start reading more, like Karamazov's, the brothers Karamazov from Dostoevsky, he talks about this, where really it's the same coin that we're getting from the Republicans and the Democrats, just different sides. And all they're doing, because they know that the wealth is the issue, they just give us the breadcrumbs and keep us satisfied, a little hungry, but also a little satisfied, so that we're not like, because if we're fully hungry, then we're going to start firing. Shakespeare says in Julius Caesar, Caesar's, tells Brutus, be careful about the skinny dude, because they're hungry. It's the overweight people who are satisfied. Back in the day, the Romans, if you were plump, that meant that you were rich, right? And so I agree with you on the economic thing, but what's the remedy, right? I don't want our hope to be deferred over the next 4 years, and then we get to the end of this presidency and they say, well, the reason why we didn't get much hope is because he had to undo all of this, and then it just becomes nothing more than a referendum on Trump. I want it to be about the American people. I don't want this presidency to be what I felt like the last one was turning around to the last one saying, we're going to do everything you undo everything you did. I don't, and to be honest, the first couple of days it felt like this, going back and saying, ooh, look at, ha, 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 we're doing everything that undoing everything that you did. And I'm like, but is that unifying? It doesn't feel unifying to me. I'm not saying that they're not appropriate acts. I think the Paris climate change, and the things on a global scale are important. But can't we then use unifying language, that we're not then doing what Wittgenstein claimed that the church so often does, is just play language games? That's all my pushback is. My concern is hope will remain deferred and nothing becomes inaugurated if it's just nothing more than a referendum on Trump. If Biden and Harris, which I really do, this is my hope, they focus on the American people, like should be done by the president and the vice president, then we'll feel that hope. Where though does the church then press into it and not give them a pass and say, and that's all my push with the language is, don't give them a pass, because I believe that the only way for hope to truly be inaugurated is for an active engagement of the church at a level that is embracing of all creeds, of all colors, of all characters, because they understand the ever evasive, impressive, significance and power of the gospel. What church though is going to do that? What church leaders? If not us, then who, right? And so this is what my question is for 2021.
Yeah, and that's definitely what you said, Matt. Is definitely I think that's definitely the case. Is that as a church, we're gonna have to stand firm on who we are, find our identity in Christ, and not flow to and fro with the whims of the political shifts. We have to continue what values that we see, what brings the common good, what we see that will bring shalom to the world in which we live. We got to stand up on those things and push the political leaders that we have. Now, if the political leaders actually want our ear, then we got to have something to say. And we're going to have to say it loudly, and we're going to have to speak it to them, and then we're going to work from there. In that regard, I think the church, in many ways, should be a model for society. We should be able to live and show what true unity looks like within the halls of our church, within our communities of believers. And we'd be a model to society to say, look, here, this is what we're doing. you guys should be able to do the same kind of thing. But I don't know. I don't know. I'm keep thinking that we're gonna be pushed by our political affiliations, and I am in some regard kind of afraid to see what it's gonna be if we're gonna kind of go back to our silos or just not talk about this stuff when we should be a model for society in that regard. So, yeah.
Last thoughts, Tony?
I think we need to keep the same energy, whatever energy we had in regards to critiquing Trump and Pence. We need to now keep in critiquing Biden and Harris. If we truly want to have a Christ-centered prophetic voice, we need to be critiquing the powers that withhold justice from the very people that Jesus came to serve and save. And so for those of us with more privilege, we need to leverage that privilege, be willing to disabuse ourselves of the notion of being popular or having a platform, and we need to continue to press for the flourishing of all. And so exactly like what Phil said, the church needs to be the church, and we need to not have that's the fine thread that we need to weave is the church needs to embody a Christocentric politic. We cannot have anything be the adjective for our politic or our faith. But our faith needs to be what activates our politic. And so I think whatever it takes for us to keep the same energy, we need to, lest we lose the relational focus of our brothers and sisters who disagree with us or find themselves on a different political aisle. Let's bring the faith out of the political aisles and back into the church pews. That's what we need to do. And so I'm excited. We only have another 3 years and 300 and something days to go. So let's get cracking.
Hey, and that's what we're going to keep doing. We're going to keep uncorking the possibilities here at New Wine Uncorked. Every week we're going to be hitting this off. This week we were talking about inaugurated hope or hope deferred. Next week we're going to be talking about one of Tony's favorite words. Go look it up in Greek. It's called skubala. Are we bringing in shalom as the church? Are we bringing in the skubala? Okay. And so this continued push into hope. So on behalf of my brothers, who I just enjoy learning from every day, and I know every single one of you viewers do the same. And so be sure to hit subscribe right now on the YouTube page so that whenever the next New Wine Uncorked or the New Wine Tastings or the New Wine Table Talks gets uploaded, you'll be first to know. And then also you'll head on over to the Facebook page and hit like so that you can participate with what Phil and what Tony, what myself and other New Wine leaders are doing. Because as last week Phil had said, we are listening your questions, your comments, and your participation. Hit us up because it's only as strong as the unity that we have. We really do believe in that. And that's the hope that's moving forward. So again, thanks for joining us this week. Until next week, we'll see you on the flip side.